As we've been discussing throughout the week, Boris Johnson has been thrust into 2 investigations in relation to potential COVID rule-breaking in Downing Street during lockdown. I mean, I'm sure we're all aware of that, and indeed most of you are probably sick of it. But anyway, one is by senior civil servant Sue Gray, whose final report into the parties we still await, possibly on Monday, we're thinking. And the second by the Metropolitan Police. So that's where Boris is up to at the moment.
Yes, well, now there's fresh claims that he lied about intervening in rescuing animals from Afghanistan. So we can be joined by Tom Harwood, our political correspondent, right now to discuss that. So just tell us a bit more about these fresh allegations and their significance as well.
Well, there's a bit of confusion over what this all means. The Foreign Affairs Select Committee yesterday, just before Prime Minister's questions, it didn't get that much coverage at the time because, of course, we're going through an extraordinary moment of convulsing of British politics. But an email, a leaked email was published by the Foreign Affairs Select Committee from someone in the Foreign Office saying that the Prime Minister was personally giving his approval to an evacuation flight of cats and dogs from Kabul airports. Now, of course, the Prime Minister, in an interview over the summer around the time, absolutely flatly denied that he had personally intervened. Now, the reason why this is a little bit murky is, of course, this isn't a smoking gun. This isn't evidence that the Prime Minister personally intervened. What it is evidence that someone in the Foreign Office thought that the Prime Minister had intervened. So if we're going to take a generous interpretation of the Prime Minister's view here, it could be that there were mixed wires, that someone thought they were acting on the behalf of the Prime Minister, or it could be that the Prime Minister is being less than truthful and did personally intervene.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we'll have to wait and see, really. But it is starting to look... Well, it's not starting to look. It looks now like there's a massive witch hunt going on with Boris Johnson. Things are being leaked left, right and centre. Do you not think? I mean, you know, people are... Whether it's pictures of him, you know, in his back garden or whatever. Apparently, Sue Gray's report obviously has got pictures of him in front of bottles of wine and things like that. And then now, you know, all these emails are coming out. It's looking a little bit like a witch hunt, isn't it?
I suppose when you have a moment of maximum weakness for an individual, all of the various enemies in various camps think, well, now's the moment to pounce, now's the moment to strike. I think that's the reason why for 2 years we didn't hear about this evidence of parties. We didn't hear about these sort of stories until a slight dip in the polls, the convulsing over the Owen Paterson affair, and then suddenly these party stories start to come out of the woodwork. I'm not sure it's necessarily a organised conspiracy, but more just the likelihood that various people who, for various reasons, dislike this Prime Minister feel like now is the time to leak what they were holding.
Can I not just say as well, do you not think Barry Gardner's got off a bit lightly here? I mean, that was a massive story about that Chinese spy. We're not talking about that at all, are we?
That certainly was. There was a Chinese spy whose son was employed by a senior member of Parliament who seemed to be mixing with the great and the good of British politics for well over a decade at the core of the British establishment. Yeah. This was a story that we have quickly...
That's a massive story.
Moved away from. But I think this is the problem, and this is why so many politicians, particularly on the Conservative side, are so frustrated. There are big events going on in the world. Potential war in Europe, the highest inflation in 30 years. Foreign actors, hostile foreign actors mixing in the core of our politics. And what are we talking about so often? Wine and cheese. But whose fault is that? Yeah. That's the big question. Yeah. Is it the fault of Boris Johnson for getting in those parties, that we're being a big distraction? Or is it the fault of Tory MPs for getting into too much of a fuss about it? I mean, that's a question, because, of course, when we look at every opinion poll about where the country sits, of course there is a solid core group of people who think Boris Johnson can do no wrong. There is, of course, the Tory party still polling around 35%. But the rest of the public, very, very angry.
Well, tell us when we can finally stop talking about this, because, I mean, the conclusion a lot of people were waiting for in some respects was that Sue Gray report. When will that be published? And do you think that's when those 54 letters will go into the backbench, the chair of the backbench committee, to try and force that leadership election?
You know, it's so hard to know, because also there are big questions now over whether the report will be published or can be published in full. There are arguments between lawyers and civil servants within the structures of government who say that when there's an active Metropolitan Police investigation, as was opened a couple of days ago, what the Metropolitan Police are exploring may not be able to be published in full. So there's a question about how much will be redacted about this report, how much will be able to go forward, and this seems to be the delay. We know that as of yesterday, Sue Gray has completed her report. She has finished writing it. What is happening now is that various lawyers and civil service members are peering over every jot and tittle of that report before it could reach the public domain, because they don't want to prejudice the Met Police investigation, and they want to make sure that potentially relatively junior members of the civil service don't get implicated too heavily. There are trade union officials, apparently, reportedly, who are saying, well, if there's some junior member who's staffing a photocopier who went to one party, they shouldn't be suddenly on the front page of every newspaper. And I think that's reasonable.
Absolutely.
And ironically, it's the Labour Party that's demanding that this report go out in full. And potentially that might be that might be hitting slightly too hard at relatively junior members of the civil service. So there's all of those problems that need to be discussed and gone over before this report makes its way to number 10, before then number 10 decides to publish, before then the Prime Minister appears in the Commons. We know that MPs are on what's called Conservative MPs are on what's called a one-line whip today. That means there's no significant business. A three-line whip means they really have to be there for crucial votes.
Yeah.
A one-line whip means they can basically go back to their constituencies. So really, today in Parliament, nothing big happening. Tomorrow, Friday, nothing. It's very rare that something big happens on a Friday in Parliament. And then, of course, the weekend. When we're expecting this to flare up in Parliament? Monday, perhaps.
Well, there we go. Tom, thank you very much for whizzing us through a range of Boris-related issues there, and indeed squeezing the word tittle in to your report, which I thought was expertly done. Right, OK.